Hello and welcome to Biblical Breadcrumbs, where if you have a Bible, you probably want to be in Psalm 28 today. That's the message, the chapter I'm going to be preaching this upcoming Sunday morning as I record this. Psalm 28 is one of these interesting chapters. It's an imprecatory psalm, if you know what that means. Imprecatory is it's a curse psalm, basically, is the best way to say that. Some people think of it as a vengeance psalm or a revenge psalm. As we go through, hopefully I'll point out some differences between the idea of imprecatory incantations and the cursing versus the idea of just straight vengeance, because they're not the same thing and they shouldn't be confused, but I understand where people get that idea from. Imprecatory psalms are uncomfortable, and they're basically denouncements of other people, but in a destructive kind of way, like almost wishing ill on other people and wishing for God to destroy them. Most famous of these would be Psalm 137, the very last verse of which basically just pronounces, well, it doesn't basically just pronounce something. It just says, "Blessed are the ones who take your children and, crush them against the rocks, throw them on rocks, or crush their heads," or something like that. And that sounds awful. That sounds like violence and vengeance and all these terrible things. How exactly do you read something like that, right? Psalm 137, and then try to square it with, love your neighbor as yourself. Like, how exactly do those things work together? Love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Maybe the imprecatory psalms help to inspire that kind of attitude. Yeah, sure, I love the people that are nice to me, but to those who are mean to me or rude in some way, well, blessed be the ones who murder your children, How exactly do you square that with God's attitude? If God is loving, if God is merciful, if God is gracious, where do the imprecatory psalms fit in? A lot of people, when they hear imprecatory psalms, are very, very uncomfortable with what they have to say. When you're calling curses on someone else, it doesn't sound like you're really loving them. But what I'll try to argue today is imprecatory psalms very much help us as people of faith to be nice to other people who are evil, right? Imprecatory psalms are really, it's not the practice of getting vengeance for yourself. Imprecatory psalms are actually the practice of giving up your right or your want for vengeance and handing those things over to God, letting God deal with it. And instead of taking out my anger on someone else, I actually just give it to God, and God will deal with it. God will do justice in the end. And I can instead focus on being good and loving to the person who is right next to me. Psalm 28 is one of the very much the less severe psalms, and so I figure this is a good starting place. If you just open up Psalm 137 and read it and haven't had any of the other background, then it sounds awful. And when you read it with the background, it is still awful, but you understand the point behind it. The hope is, if I can teach Psalm 28 in the proper and helpful way, you can kind of lay the groundwork for what an imprecatory psalm actually is, and by the time you get to stuff like 137, that'll make a lot more sense, and it'll be a lot more understandable once that has the proper context behind it. So, we're going to Psalm 28 as a good kind of introduction to the topic. It's only, I think, 9 verses long, so we'll go ahead and read Psalm 28, and then discuss it in a few different sections. To you, Lord, I call. My rock, do not be deaf to me. For if you are silent to me, I will become like those who go down to the pit. Hear the sound of my pleading when I cry to you for help, when I raise my hands toward your holy sanctuary. Do not drag me away with the wicked and with those who practice injustice, who speak peace with their neighbors while evil is in their hearts. Give back to them according to their work and according to the evil of their practices. Give back to them according to the work of their hands. Repay them what is due them. Because they do not regard the works of the Lord, nor the deeds of his hands, he will tear them down and not build them up. Blessed be the Lord, because he has heard the sound of my pleading. The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, and I am helped. Therefore my heart triumphs, and with my song I shall thank him. The Lord is their strength, and he is a refuge of salvation to his anointed. Save your people, and bless your inheritance. Be their shepherd also, and carry them forever. What a whirlwind of things, right? David opens here. It is a Psalm of David. Forgot to read that as part of the introduction. In the English Bible, the words atop, the words on top of different chapters that kind of describe what's in them, those are man-made. However, in the Psalms, when you see titles that say like a Psalm of David or a Psalm of Asaph or a Psalm of David when he was in the cave hiding from Saul or whatever that is, that's actually original to the text, and so that counts as the text. In the Hebrew scripture, even still today, apparently that is verse 1. Verse 1 is saying, a Psalm of David or whoever actually wrote it, and then the rest of it is verses 2 through the end of the whatever the particular psalm is. As you go through this, I think it's helpful to maybe pull on the James 1 verse 6 paradigm. James 1 and verse 6 is talking about praying to God, and when you're praying, when you're asking for wisdom, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives freely and without reproach. But he must ask in faith without doubting. Those are the qualifiers of what has to be done. When you're praying to God, you must ask. When you're praying to God, you must ask in faith, right? You can't ask without the faith or outside the realm of faith. If you don't believe it, then why are you asking for it? And you have to ask without doubting. You have to come back around and center yourself and know that God will answer you and know that God can fix the problem that you're asking about. Ask in faith without doubting. I understand Psalm 28 is not praying for wisdom, or at least not specifically praying for wisdom, but you can see kind of the same elements actually play out here. When you look at David and the prayer he's offering in Psalm 28, you see him asking in faith, and you see him not doubting. You see him very, very confident on those things. And so as you break this down, point 1, point 2, point 3, point 1 would be ask in verse 1. You see him asking and appealing to God. Verses 2 through 5 would be point 2, which is asking in faith. Here's a bunch of ways you can see David's faith made manifest in the appeal that he's making. And then verses 6 through 9 would be asking without doubting. And the confidence that he expresses that God has heard him and will answer or has answered, and just God is aware and he has control of the situation. And so you see a lack of doubt in David from that perspective. If you're looking for a 3-point outline, there you go. Ask in faith without doubting. Again, James 1 and verse 6 is about praying for wisdom specifically. Psalm 28 is not specifically praying for wisdom. I understand there's a difference there, but using that terminology from James 1 can help to quantify what we're doing in Psalm 28, and maybe that helps make sense of the imprecatory psalm. In a way, it is asking for wisdom in dealing with your enemies and people who hate you. How do I deal with that, God? Well, here it is. And so he opens by just asking. We know this is written by David, and so when I call the psalmist David, yeah, I call him that because the title says so, and that's what was actually written. We do not know what his circumstances are. There are some psalms in which you do, some psalms that have more of a title to them. Psalm 14 says, for the music director, a psalm of David. We don't really know when that happened, but we do know the context. It's meant for a musician. Or you go back to maybe Psalm 3 is the one that stands out to me. Psalm 3's title is a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. And then, my Lord, how my enemies have increased, is when the psalm itself actually starts. But you see the title there puts it in a proper time frame, in a proper context. This is when he's running away from Absalom. Okay, I can go back to 2 Samuel. I can go back to, I think that's chapter 14, 15, maybe 16. It's somewhere in there that Absalom rises up against David and he chases him away. And so David prays, that's the shield about me psalm, is Psalm 3. You, Lord, my enemies have increased. I'm surrounded on every side, but you, Lord, are a shield about me, and so I am safe. Even in the terrible circumstances that I'm in, you protect me, and so I'm safe. You have this picture in Psalm 3 that is not quantified, it's clarified by the situation around him, and it makes much more sense. You can see all these horrible things happening in David's life if you go and read the context of Absalom rising up against David, but then you get to see David's reaction to it, and so you have that kind of balance, and it's an explanation of why Psalm 3 is the way it is. Here in Psalm 28, we don't have that kind of thing. We're not told it's a psalm of David when he's running away from Absalom or from Saul or from somebody else. We're not told when this is written, but you can easily imagine a situation kind of like that, because the situation David is describing is being surrounded by the evildoers, being surrounded by people who hate him, who are constantly around him. They want to attack him. They want to destroy him. They're doing evil to him. It's just a messy situation. I don't know what all's going on. I don't know how public or private that is. I don't know how violently David's being treated versus he has people in I believe it's verse 3, who are practicing injustice but speaking peace with their neighbors with evil in their hearts. So he has people who pretend to be good, but they're not. And I don't know if he can just see all these evil things that they're doing, so he knows that they're not. I don't know if they are doing evil to others around him, and he says, really, like, I'm surrounded by evil people who are doing evil to others. I don't want that to turn on me. Maybe he's surrounded by people who are doing evil to him actively. I don't know the situation, and David doesn't clarify here. But you do see that something's the matter, right? At the very least, you can see that something's messed up. Something's disturbing him. The situation is very dire. And so he turns to God. When you're reading an imprecatory psalm, a lot of times the harsh language seems to drive us away from it and make it unapproachable and make us afraid to even consider it. Like, what is he saying? It sounds violent. It sounds nasty. I don't like the implications that he's saying. But when imprecatory psalms are being prayed, you have to put yourself in the situation of the person, which is, have you ever felt the kind of desperation that David is feeling? Ask God when you need help. Okay, what kind of help does David need? What do you see about David? What kind of horrible situation is he in? You see that he needs to talk to God. In this is all going to be from verse 1. To you, Lord, I call. Why are you calling to God? Why do you need help? Why are you calling to God and not speaking to him? Why can you not just say, hey, God, what's up? Can I get some help over here? This is not casual. This is desperate. Call is stronger than speak. It may imply that there is a bit of a distance between David and God. There seems to be some kind of separation that is borne out in the rest of the verse. David is going through something horrible. He's calling out to God. There is a kind of desperation. There's a kind of plea in his voice that God actually listened to him. This is natural, right? If you want a relationship with God, then you have to talk to him. If you don't talk to him, you're not going to have a relationship. But the idea here is, I have to call out to you. I can't not do that. I'm in such a bad situation. I have to have you here. And I have to have you listening. Verse 1, can you not hear the desperation in his voice? When he says, my rock, do not be deaf to me. If you are silent to me, I will become like those who go down to the pit. Verse 1, not very pleasant, is it? My rock, do not be deaf to me. He says, God, don't ignore me. Right? All these things, these terrible things are happening. Don't ignore me when I call out to you. I need your help. I need you to actually listen. It's natural for us to want to be heard, but a lot of times when you're speaking to God, we don't really think to pray for God to listen. And some of that is, a privileged kind of attitude. Oh, of course, God would listen to me because he cares about me because I'm great. Or maybe he cares about me because I'm his child, and so obviously he's going to listen to me. There are plenty of people who pray to God and ask for God to listen to them, judging by the Ecclesiastes 5 principle probably, which is God has more important things to do than just listen to everything that you say. So speak very briefly when you go into the presence of God, is the shorthand way to say that. He has more important things to do. You're begging him to listen, to pay attention, because this isn't a normal kind of situation. But you can also get the feeling that David has prayed before. He has prayed several times. This is his 3rd prayer. This is his 10th prayer. This is his 100th prayer about the same kind of issue, where it seems like he has a problem and he's been praying about it and God hasn't done anything. And now he's to the point where, what else can I do? God, I need you to listen. I can't survive if you don't listen. And it doesn't seem like you're listening. There's an implication here that God hasn't been paying attention to David. And that's kind of an issue. If things are going well between you and God, you don't have to say, God, please respond to me. But David does. Something's wrong in his life, and he's scared. There is no immediate answer from God. He is scared as to what that means for his and God's relationship, possibly. For his survival on earth, possibly. He is just scared as to what that means. because he's not connected with God. And if he's not connected with God, nothing's going to be okay. God, I need you to listen. Do not ignore me, please. He needs to talk to God. He's calling out to him. He needs God to listen. Don't ignore me. He needs confirmation that he's going to survive, because David seems like he's going to die, or he thinks he's going to die. If you are silent to me, I'll become like those who go down to the pit being a picture of death. Sometimes I believe it's the same idea as Sheol, or in the Old Testament, or Hades in the New Testament, which is not hell, it is the realm of the dead. There are some translations that confuse that and say that Hades and hell are the same thing. They're not. Hades is just the realm of the dead. Hell is actually like separation from God and torment. You would have, in the Greek idea, in the Greek underworld, you would have Elysium, which would be a form of heaven. You would have the fields of asphodel, or just like nothing's happening, and then you would have actual torments that were given to people. I think Sisyphus is the one who like rolls the boulder up the mountain eternally, or various others have various different consequences for horrible, evil things they've done in life. Hades is just the idea of being dead, right? Hades is just kind of the non-issue. Nothing particularly good has happened to you. Nothing particularly bad has happened to you. You're not in heaven. You're not in hell. You're just dead, right? You're just gone from the earth. That's the idea of the pit here. That's the idea of Sheol, as the Old Testament would say, is just, if you are silent to me, I'll become like somebody who's dead. That's what happens, right? If you're not involved here, God, if you're not involved in this situation, I'm going to die. I don't know if that's literal or not. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know. Maybe that is just David's exaggeration. Maybe that is just David's worry, and it's not something that would actually happen. Maybe it is something that will actually happen. If God is not involved, David would die. How many times did God protect David from Saul, or from Absalom, or from any of his enemies? How many times does God step in there and actually protect David from those people actively? I don't know. We're not told. But it might be a lot, right? And so you have this idea. I don't know how overemphasized it is, how much it is David's feeling versus actual fact, but David is stressed out about this. If you're not involved, I'm going to die here. Again, I don't know what's going on, but it's bad because David is quiet, because God is quiet. David doesn't have this connection with God, or God is not answering him according to a nice timeline, and so David has a problem. He's praying to God. He needs God's help. He's asking as God has commanded. If you want something from God, you better ask him. Ask him. Ask in faith without doubting. We'll get to those other two in just a second. It seems like whatever is going on, God does not seem like he hears David at this point, and yet David asks anyway. God doesn't answer immediately all the time, and often, maybe it's often that he doesn't answer immediately. But we've got a command to ask anyway. We can't be asking and assuming that God won't help. We also can't just jump and assume that God won't help. We ask him once and then we never ask him again. No immediate response. Oh, well, God's not going to help. I got to do everything myself. No. Be patient with that process, right? But it starts when you ask. Ask in faith without doubting. And maybe you'll get an answer. We'll see. Ask. That's where David starts. He just asks God, if you're not here, I can't survive. God, please help me in this situation. If you want to understand imprecatory psalms, you have to understand where the psalmist is coming from. A lot of people skim over that point, don't realize how desperate the psalmist is, and then think it's unreasonable that he prays for the things that he's going to pray for. You got to start by asking. Second part is ask in faith. You see in verses 2 through 5 expressions of David's faith. You can see the method by which David appeals, and in it you can just see over and over again his faith is made manifest in a faithful expression of what's going on and how he wants God to deal with the situation. He feels like God is not hearing him, and you can see that from the first verse. He feels like God is not there, and yet he stays faithful to God, and he's asking him for the appropriate things. Even though he feels like God is ignoring him, he is not ignoring God. He is staying faithful. There's an important principle there. It's the Daniel 3 principle. Daniel 3 verses 16 and 17. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say, look, God can save us from the fire. God will save us from the fire. But even if he does not save us from the fire, we are not going to bow down to your gods. There are three important principles there. God can do something about the situation. God can choose whether or not he does something about the situation. God has the capability. He can fix it. God has the ability to choose. He may or may not. He has free will. And ultimately, we are still expected to be faithful anyway, right? We still have expectations of ours. God promised that he would save us to heaven one day. Maybe he lets us burn in a fire instead of preserving us through the fire to take us at a different time. Maybe he just takes us then, but he's fulfilling his end of the bargain, whatever that looks like. Our job is to be faithful on the earth. And that means we stay faithful in the situation. Even though David is stressed out of his mind right now, he's staying faithful. And you see it in the things that he expresses. Maybe it is this kind of faith, the kind of faith that David is living and expressing. Maybe it's that kind of faith that is encouraging God to actually respond. You have several markers of faith here that are going on in verses 2 through 5. Here are just a few of the ones that I looked at and that stood out to me. Different markers of faith. Number 1, David is crying out to God even still. Verse 2, hear the sound of my pleadings when I cry to you for help, when I raise my hands to your holy sanctuary. A marker of faith is that David has not given up on God. Yeah, you want to see David's faith? Is he praying? Yes, he is. Okay, you can start to see his faith. A lot of people would see a non-answer from God or feel abandoned from God and so stop calling out to God, stop trying, but David hasn't. He knows that God is not answering at the moment, or God is not answering as quickly as he wants, or God is not giving him the answer that he wants, and he continues to pray anyway. Do you have a kind of faith in God that trusts in God even in the worst of times? Don't quit early. God is faithful to us. We have to be faithful to him. David is crying out to God even still. That's a marker of his faith. A second way that you can see David's faith is David is praying in the correct way. Also in verse 2, when I cry to you for help, when I raise my hand towards your holy sanctuary. What is that? Well, in David's day, David, if you remember, he wanted to build God a temple. He saw God was still in a tabernacle. He wants to build God a temple, and God says, no, I'll let your son Solomon do that. You got to be content with the tabernacle for the moment. So David's praying towards your holy sanctuary, your tabernacle, right? He's praying towards that. He's looking to God for help. It's in a literal sense. He looks towards the tabernacle. I'm praying that direction. I'm looking to God literally, but also metaphorically. He's approaching God. He's approaching the throne of God as best he can. Last week, Leviticus 16, the Day of Atonement, which was last Sunday morning sermon, came out last Monday morning from when this video will release. You had that picture of the Ark of the Covenant and then the mercy seat with the angel's wings overlapping on the roof to form a kind of seat. I made the point, that's the throne of God on the earth. David is looking to the throne of God as close as he can get. He can't enter the most holy place. The high priest could barely do that once a year for just a couple of minutes. And he can't enter God's presence physically, but he is metaphorically looking to God with everything he has. He's giving it to God. He's raising his hands towards God and just kind of opening up and asking God to bless him. David is praying in the correct way. God's in the tabernacle, and so David is praying for it. Very intentional in approaching God and trying to do his best. David's crying out to God. He's even praying in the correct way. Later on in 1 Kings chapter 8, Solomon, I reference this fairly frequently because this is really important. Solomon, when he builds the temple of God, enshrines an idea in the people of Israel. He prays to God at the officiation, the opening ceremony to the temple. He's there about to offer sacrifices, and he prays to God that, look, if your people turn towards you and pray towards the temple, please hear them, because The idea is they're approaching you, so please listen to them. Daniel in Daniel chapter 9, first part of Daniel 9, he's praying towards the temple in Jerusalem. There's no temple in Jerusalem, it's just the temple ruins, but he's still approaching in that same mindset is, I know there's not a temple there, but that's still the idea of God's presence. And so he prays in that direction to try and approach God as best as he can. David's doing the same thing. This is before the temple is founded. This is before Solomon offers the prayer. This is way before any of those things. But David's still doing the same idea. He is trying his best to approach the throne of God. He's coming before him, praying in the correct way. It's a mark of his faith. He's crying out to God even through all the disappointments. He's praying in the correct way. Another thing you see is, as a marker of faith, is that David wants to stay righteous. In verse 3, don't drag me away with the wicked, and with those who practice injustice, who speak peace with their neighbors while evil is in their hearts. Don't associate me with those people. Right, and there's kind of there's a two-part kind of call here. Number one, I don't want to be associated with the wicked in any way, right? I don't want to be associated with the wicked in judgment. Don't drag me away with the wicked when you go and destroy them, I think is probably the stronger implication in verse 3. Don't drag me away to destroy me. I'm not wicked. I'm trying not to be wicked. Like, don't destroy me along with the rest of them. Not that I don't deserve it, but I would prefer to be spared from that. And so he's praying for kind of forgiveness, kind of salvation. He's praying just not to be associated with the wicked and destruction. He also doesn't want to be associated with the wicked on the earth, right? I don't want to be here with people who practice injustice and who talk one way and do something else on the inside, who speak all the right words. They speak peace with their neighbors, but evil is in their hearts. That's a Matthew 5 concept. Doing the right thing, but doing it in the wrong attitude. Saying all the right words, but hating your brother in your heart. I refrain from murder, but I still hate. I refrain from adultery, but I still lust. I refrain from speaking rude words, but I still don't like you. You haven't solved anything. You're not actually loving your neighbor as yourself if you have evil in your heart. David doesn't want to be around that. He doesn't want the people around him to be like that either. I don't want to be associated with them. Not in the judgment they're about to face, and not in anything else. I don't want to part with the wicked. God, spare me. Bring me to the righteous, right? I want to be with the righteous. I don't want these wicked things around me. It seems there is an implication here that the wicked are surrounding him. And so if God were just to wipe out the wicked, God would take David along with them, because the wicked have surrounded him. There's no way to get to David except going through the wicked. It's almost like the wicked are right there. He just wants out. He feels trapped by them, because the righteous people don't want to be involved with evil. And you can see this even in how desperate the situation is. David is not capitulating to be just like everybody else. Even with all the evil influences around him, even though it makes him uncomfortable to be righteous in the midst of so much evil, David wants to be with God. And David wants to be righteous. He wants to stay in God's presence. That is his motivation, is to be in the presence of righteousness and not the presence of evil. David wants to stay righteous. You can see his faith in that. Is, God, don't wipe me away with these people. He is going to pray in just a second, please wipe these people away. But it's in an effort to get away from the evil. He doesn't want to be corrupted by the evil anymore. Please take that away. Get that out of here. Let me be free from those things. David's motivation is to stay in God's presence. He wants to be righteous. That's a mark of his faith. A fourth mark of his faith is that he prays for justice. In verse 4. And up until this point, a lot of this sounds good, right? It sounds like a terrible situation, but it sounds like David's dealing with it really, really righteously. God, I feel like my prayers aren't getting answered. Please listen to me when I pray this to you. I'm calling out to you. I'm trying to approach you in the right way. I don't want to be the wicked people. I don't want to be destroyed along with the wicked people. I want to be free from the wicked people. I don't want those influences on me. So, verse 4, destroy them, right? Kill them all. Get rid of them all. But is that really what David's praying for? The imprecatory psalm section comes down to this idea in verses 4, primarily in verse 4, which is essentially, right, if we were to shorthand this and summarize it down, we would say, God, destroy them all. is basically what the plea is. But if you actually look at the language David is using in verse 4, it's not destroy them all. It is, as the title for this will be, render to them as they deserve. Repay them according to their deeds. The end of verse 4, repay them what is due them. What does that mean? Read verse 4 again. Give back to them according to their work and according to the evil of their practices. Give back to them according to the work of their hands. Repay them what is due them. Because they do not regard the works of the Lord, nor the deeds of his hands, he will tear them down and not build them up. They have done evil. God, you have accounted for their evil. You know the evil that they've done. Make sure they face justice for that. That's what the prayer is. It's not destroy people, I hate them so much, I don't like them, therefore can you kill them please. A lot of times I feel like we have that kind of impression from imprecatory psalms, which is just, hey, they've done something bad for me, can you kill them? In reality, it is they've hurt the righteous. Make sure justice happens. And I don't know what that looks like. Maybe if God looks at it, depending on what they've done, maybe they get killed, maybe they don't. If they said one mocking thing against the righteous and then felt bad about it a little bit later on, do you think God's going to kill them for it? No, there's mercy there. There's forgiveness that exists. The plea of David is to give it to God. The plea of David is, I don't know exactly what to do here. I know what I feel. I know that I feel uncomfortable with the things they've done. I know that I see evil in those things that they've done, but ultimately it's up to God to hold them to account. David is not really praying for others' destruction as much as it might look like that. David is praying for God to deal with the problem. A lot of people, when they enter into a prayer kind of like this, they end up praying for vengeance, or they take vengeance themselves without even praying about it and asking God about it. This is not vengeance. Vengeance is when David takes control of the situation and David hurts someone else because of what that other person did to him. Vengeance is when you have suffered a personal wrong, or someone else has hurt you personally, and so you go and hurt them personally. This is not vengeance. This is actually David giving up his right, quote unquote, his right to punish them. This is David giving up his vengeance and his bitterness against them and his hatred towards them for the things they've done to him. And this is David saying, you know what? I'm not going to dwell on that anymore. God, make sure that everything is just at the end. And then David moves on. The point of the imprecatory psalm is not avenge yourself, is not look at all these horrible things that people have done to me. I want to do evil to them. God, please give me the strength to hurt them. The point of the imprecatory psalm is, God, you saw that wasn't just. I can't respond in a righteous way towards that. Like, if it was up to me, I would hurt the other person, and I know that's not righteous. So please make sure that everything works out for righteousness in the end. And there you go, right? My ability to punish has been voluntarily given up. It's not that punishment will not happen. It is not that justice will not happen. You're very, very clear in the imprecatory psalms. Justice will be done. But ultimately, it's not going to be done through me or anything that I have chosen. It's going to be done because God's in charge and God can figure it out. David prays for justice. He gives up his right, as it were. He lets God have control of the situation and says, you know, as much as it's hurt me, it's really not about me. So please just make sure everything works out in the end. And that's where you see the fifth marker of his faith. It's in verse 5. David leaves it to God. Look, God will tear them down and not build them up. Because they have done evil things, God will destroy them. God will take care of it. And that's all. Do you know what that leaves room for? Somebody's texting me. That wasn't actually a text. That was a calendar event. It's unimportant. Do you know what God leaves room for? Or do you know what verse 5 leaves room for? It leaves room for the people who don't know God. It leaves room for the people who don't respect God. It leaves room for God to deal with that. But it also says, verse 5, they do not regard the works of the works of the Lord. He'll tear them down. Okay, what if the person repents and starts regarding the works of the Lord? God's not going to tear them down. And ultimately, David doesn't say, destroy my enemies, no matter what they do. He says, God, if they are unfaithful to you, destroy them. Like, be done. Justice be done. If they are evil towards you, get rid of them. Okay. That means God gets to make a choice on what happens to them. That means David is voluntarily giving up his ability to choose what happens to them. That means David is recognizing it's not about him anymore. David's recognizing that it's really not about him in the first place at all. Yes, horrible things have happened to me, but what does that matter? The important thing is what's happened to God and how people have treated God, and God will make the final decision on that. God is the authority, man is not. God is just, man is not. God is able to make a good determination here, man is not. And so instead of taking vengeance for myself, I'll let God take that final decision. What does it look like for justice to be done? Well, I don't always know. And so instead of trying to pursue it myself, instead of trying to selfishly chase vengeance and try to hurt somebody else, I'm just going to go and say, God, you can deal with it better than I can. And ultimately, it's up to him. Imprecatory psalms tend to make us uncomfortable because they call for the destruction of people. But actually, if you read what's happening, David is not calling for the destruction of people. He's calling for God to control the situation and make sure it ends up righteous. And if people choose to get themselves destroyed, if people choose to do evil against God, to ignore God and the deeds of his hands, then yes, God will tear them down. Because that's what happens when you ignore God. But it also gives people a chance to repent. Because David's not going to go out and hurt somebody. He's given that responsibility to God. God can do it if that's the righteous thing to do. But until then, David can go out and try to help the people that have hurt him. The Psalms are comforts. These are very comforting Psalms because they're not about destroying people. They're about God being in control and us as humans being content with that. The revenge of man is a dangerous thing that is difficult to tame, shall we say. It is rarely tempered with wisdom like it should be. But when you have God, if you give it to God, he can deal with the horrible situations that arise wisely. He's not going to get unbalanced. He's not going to get evil. Imprecatory psalms are the reminder that God can deal with the situation better than you can, and so you'd best let him just deal with it. Because if I know that God has it, if I know whatever horrible thing has happened to me, if I know that God has got the situation under control, I can focus on helping the people in it instead of trying to attack them myself. Imprecatory psalms are fundamentally, they're not prayers for revenge. Blessed be the ones who dash his little one against the rock, Psalm 137. That is an awful thing to say. But it's said about people who have done such great evil towards the psalmist and towards his people in general. You know, if he stays evil, then blessed be the ones who destroys him, who destroys his family. If he stays evil, then there is a blessing on the person who destroys him. But I'm not going to go do that myself. I'm going to let God decide what actually happens. I'm going to let God be in charge of who does what to him. But I'm not going to get involved. Because, you know, God can deal with it. And it's not on me to deal with. We are not praying for revenge here. We are surrendering revenge. You're surrendering the anger and the bitterness and giving it to God. He can deal with the situation, so I don't have to worry about it anymore. And so as odd as it sounds, I think imprecatory psalms are actually very helpful. Because when our neighbors do something terrible to us, the basic natural reaction is to turn and do something terrible to them. But when my neighbor does something terrible to me, if I can just give it to God, I'm going to respond in love instead of hate against that person. Your enemies can hurt you all they want to, but if you give it to God, you can pass on that and be content to do righteousness instead. You gotta ask in faith. This is faith. You can see it all throughout. Again, markers of faith. He's crying out to God. He's praying correctly. He wants to stay righteous. He's praying for justice. He's leaving it to God is a mark of faith. God will deal with it. I'm going to let it alone. You have to ask. You have to ask in faith. If you want these things from God, you have to ask in faith. And thirdly, you have to ask without doubting. Does God answer David? I have no idea, quite frankly. Verses 6 through 9 are interesting to read. Blessed be the Lord, he has heard the sound of my pleading. What does that mean? Did that mean God instantly came down and smited all of David's enemies? Maybe, but it doesn't say that. Nowhere does God come down and answer David. Nowhere does God come down into David's mind and say, hey, I got this, don't worry about it. There are Psalms, there are a couple where the Lord does have an active speaking role, and so it seems like David prayed something and then God actually spoke to him and said, hey, I've got it. And those are recorded for us. Here, we don't have anything like that recorded. And here, again, we don't know when this was written. If this was written, while running from Absalom, then maybe the second part was written, or verse 6 was written after Absalom was killed and David was returned to his palace. It would be, very odd for David to be rejoicing that Absalom is dead, given that he doesn't rejoice that Absalom is dead in the narrative. But, just for instance, just kind of trying to illustrate something. It could be that verse 6 is written a long time after verse 5 when David sees the fulfillment, or it could be that verse 6 is written after a reply of some sort from God, or one of David's enemies is smited, and so he knows that God has heard him. It could be that those have happened, but David doesn't say that. He doesn't say anything like that. He just says, God has heard me. I don't know what he bases that on. It could be that he saw something, but it could also just be that David, when he prays, he just remembers that God is faithful to him, and God does hear his prayer. David has been through a bunch of terrible situations. Like wherever this is at written in his life, David just goes through a lot of horrible stuff in his life, but God always sees him through. Even when David does not make the right decision, even when David does plenty of evil stuff, God always sees him through it in the end. He knows God is faithful. And so, as much as some people may say, it's been 3 years after this and he's seen all these different things, I have no idea when it is. It seems to me that David is stressed and worried in the first 5 verses, but as he hands that over to God, he remembers God has always been faithful before, and he's going to continue to be faithful now. So blessed be the Lord, because he's heard the sound of my pleading. God heard me. When you give your burdens to God, doesn't it just feel better? Because God has actually listened to you. When something is so terribly stressing you out, and you turn to the Lord and you pray to him, he's heard you. He's going to answer you. It may be the answer you want. It may not be the answer you want. But he's heard you, and he's going to deal with it. Isn't that just comforting? Blessed be the Lord. He heard me. He's going to answer. Whatever that looks like, he's going to answer. He's going to deal with it. When your prayer is fundamentally, verses 4 and 5, your will be done, God. God's going to do his will. And so when you align your prayer to God's will, it's going to happen. Blessed be the Lord. We know he's going to answer that kind of prayer. You have a statement in verse 7, the idea that I trust in God. Ask in faith without doubting. Yeah, I trust in God and what God's going to do. The Lord is my strength. He's my shield. My heart trusts in him. I am helped. Therefore my heart triumphs, and with my song I shall thank him. You have all these great things that are coming because David trusts in God. He has trusted before, and it's always worked out. He trusts in God now. Even though everything is terrible, he trusts in God. God has a track record with him. God has a history of always doing the right thing and figuring out a way to help David through it. And so, even though David can't see the solution right now, I don't think, he knows God will be faithful. And so he trusts in him. My heart trusts in him, and I am helped. Just putting trust in God helps you. The help comes from trusting in the Lord. It's not, my heart trusts in him and I saw him destroy all my enemies, therefore he solved my problem, therefore I am helped. It is, I have trusted in him and now I am helped. Because I put my trust in God, and I know that He will help me out of whatever this problem situation is. To such an extent in the end of verse 7 that there is thanksgiving and there is praise. These are coming out even before the situation is fully settled. David knows who God is. He knows that God is going to help him. He knows that God is blessing him, and so he's just thankful for it. There's thankfulness, there is praise, and they're flowing out of him before everything is settled because he knows something. Ask in faith without doubting. What does he know? He knows the Lord is a saving refuge to all his anointed. Verse 8. He doesn't know that all his enemies are gone. In fact, he knows that there are enemies here. Even if God has dealt with the enemies in the present situation, there are always going to be more, and David knows that. He knows that probably better than just about anybody. There's always another problem. There's always something else coming up. But he also knows that God is a refuge of salvation to his anointed ones. And he knows that whatever comes, God will be with him. There's faith there. There is no doubt there. There is no question there. The Lord is the strength sometimes. He is the refuge of salvation to part of his anointed, of which I am ever so now and then one of them. No. This is confidence. There is no doubt here. He is safety, he is strength, he is a refuge of salvation to his anointed, and I'm one of his anointed ones. God is here, right? God is saving. There's an assurance there. And so he ends the psalm off with this idea in verse 9, lead your people, right? Save your people, bless your inheritance, be their shepherd, and carry them forever. He ends off with this confidence, God, lead your people. I think built into this is several different ideas. David, being a shepherd, knows the symbology of a shepherd. He knows that kind of metaphor, and so he uses that to address God. He's addressing God based on what he understands and what he's lived, his lived experience. And so you can see stuff like that. But you also see a kind of humility here. David is the king of Israel, but he knows he's not always going to be the king of Israel. And realistically, David knows he's not the real king of Israel. He's the physical king of Israel, but God's the real leader the whole time. Be their shepherd also. Be the one who leads them. David's not going to be here to lead all the time. He's going to die one day, but God will still be there. And so he gives that to God too. Ultimately, the leadership, Lord, it's yours. I've been anointed as a shepherd for a moment. You are a shepherd forever. And so be their shepherd and carry them forever. And I will serve as I can in the moment that I'm here. You see David's confidence. He has no doubt. God is there and he's there forever. And that is so important. When you need something from God, ask in faith without doubting. You see that David asks for something. You see that as tough as it is, as difficult as a thing as he's asking for, that ultimately evil be destroyed, and if people are evil, then the evil people be destroyed too. As difficult as a thing as that is to ask for, he's asking faithfully. And he's asking without a doubt that God will accomplish it. It may not be pleasant. We don't know when it'll happen, but it will happen. And he knows those things. You can see his faith. Though the problems arise, he knows God will remain faithful to him, and so David expresses his faith to God. He asks, and he asks in faith, and he asks without doubting. That's the idea of an imprecatory psalm. And again, the language in this one is much, much more lenient than, dash your children against the rock in Psalm 137. And so hopefully in the gentler picture, you can kind of see an example of of the mentality behind the imprecatory psalm. An imprecatory psalm is not an expression of anger and violence and hatred towards people that I want to see them destroyed. An imprecatory psalm is a recentering of oneself on God to recognize, I want horrible things to happen to these people, but I know that were I to be given my free rein to deal with them as it ought to be dealt with, or as I saw fit at the moment, it would not be just. It would not be righteous. God, take that away from me. You deal with it. I don't want to overstep my bounds. Imprecatory psalms are a fundamental realization that there is anger and there is hatred, and these are real things that you are feeling and that you are expressing. But I cannot act on those righteously. God could act on those righteously. And so I'm going to let God have it. And instead of tainting myself with evil, I'll let God deal with it in the righteous way. God knows the evils that have actually been done, and he can see it much more objectively than I can. God knows the secret things that have been done, whether for good or evil, that I do not know. God knows whether the person repented or not. God knows whether the person actually did evil or just hurt my feelings. God knows the situation better than I can. He can deal with the situation better than I can. There is anger, but God can deal with it. And so you give it to God and let him deal with it, and you do righteousness. Paul says in the book of Romans, I believe it's chapter 12, don't return evil for evil, overcome evil with good. Imprecatory psalms are a way for us who are faithful to take our feelings and our want to return evil for evil, to give that to God and say, God, if there is something to punish, God, you can do it. And instead of returning evil for evil, I give up that evil and I go and I do good instead. Imprecatory psalms are a way to do that, to make sure you surrender your hatred, to make sure you don't hurt other people, and to make sure you actually go after and do good anyway. The other thing it reminds us of is imprecatory psalms in verse 4, give back to them according to their work. Wow, right? These people have done evil. They deserve some form of punishment. God, deal with that. But also, if you know that God's going to ultimately deal with evil people by sending them to hell where they volunteered to go, by just, they didn't want to be with him, okay, fine. They don't get to be with him. If you know they're going to everlasting torment, that's not something you want, right? That's not something you want. And if I love my neighbor as myself, that's not something I want for them either. And so even though I've been hurt in the moment, when I give up that hurt, when I give it to God, and I start thinking about the eternal ramifications for things that they've done, I know that God is going to deal with that in a way that's not going to end up well for them. I know that God's going to deal with that with eternal condemnation. I don't really want that to happen to people. And so when you pray imprecatory psalms, when you remember the justice of God and the judgment of God that he will bring with him, it is just, it is righteous, but it's still not something I want people to experience. And so not only do imprecatory psalms help me to give up my anger here in the moment, it helps me to remember the ultimate destruction that's coming for the people who have done evil. And it helps me to say, I don't want them to experience that. Maybe that's motivation for me to go and help other people find their way out of evil, to give up those things and actually turn around to righteousness. God is going to deal with the evil ones. My job is to help people attain righteousness. Instead of being angry when people hurt you, be angry and do not sin. Give it to God and let God deal with it, and go and try to help somebody to give up their evil and find God before it's too late for them. That's what an imprecatory psalm is for. And so maybe when you read some of the harsher ones later on, maybe you'll see those points as they come across, because really imprecatory psalms are ultimately meant to help you and help other people to find their way back to righteousness. Don't do evil, overcome evil with good, and part of that good is going and teaching evil people that they need to change. That's it for today. We'll go ahead and put a pause there. Hopefully those are some good things to think about. Imprecatory psalms are not often talked about, but they should be. I think they're very helpful in the proper, when they're prayed in the proper way and when they're taught in the proper context and understanding of what's being said. So hopefully that's something good for you to consider, and I will see you next time on Wednesday. I'll be releasing the last part of my Daniel class on verse 12, and after that, that'll be it for this week. Next week, I'll do whatever I'm preaching Sunday morning. There will be a message on the Lord's Prayer, the disciples' prayer from Matthew chapter 6, verses 9 through 13, and we're going to be starting a new class about the idea of how to read the Bible. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to record sessions for that, because I'm not sure how much we'll cover in the auditorium. but it'll be an interesting time. So hopefully, if that sounds interesting to you, then pay attention to when those things come out. Like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff or whatever it is. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.